COVID-19 is a highly infectious virus that is spread mainly through respiratory droplets produced when an infected person coughs or sneezes. If you have any symptoms of COVID-19, please do not travel and self-isolate. See medical attention as soon as possible and wear a mask until you test negative. Please like and subscribe to this channel for more videos on locations around the country and around the world. Thank you.
We gotta get going, right?
Yeah. Sure,
As you can see, I have just passed the bar, still a term used in the legal and judicial professions, meaning I'm allowed to practice law. You are spectators, I'm a participant. So welcome to what we technically call the old State House. This was the State House of Pennsylvania, and that is still operated and owned by the city of Philadelphia. It's on federal land. But once upon a time, back 50 years after the end of the Revolutionary War, the Marquis de Lafayette, famous general and hero of the Revolutionary War, protege of George Washington, came back to Philadelphia from France and wanted to see where all these things were happening. Passage of time, our memories became a little bit dimmed at that point. So this building was operated by the city of Philadelphia. The capital had moved in 1800 down to Washington, D.C. The state of Pennsylvania moved its capital from Philadelphia to Lancaster, and then 12 years later up to Harrisburg, where it is today. And the city basically was operating all of these buildings. And this was basically used for back office work and storage, the old State House at that point. So suddenly with Lafayette's request, the city sprang into action and suddenly things got renamed. The old State House became Independence Hall. The Assembly Room, where we're going to visit next, that became the Hall of Independence. The old State House yard suddenly became Independence Square. And then, of course, about 10 years later, the old State House bell, through more of an abolition movement than anything else, became known as the Liberty Bell. So, again, the building is Georgian architecture, probably one of the most attractive architectural forms in America, if not the world. It's balanced, it's proportional, it's symmetrical. Building started in 1732, the year George Washington was born, and it was pretty much completed with the addition of a bell tower 21 years later in 1752. So 90% of the brickwork around the building is accurate and in place. About 70% of the woodwork. Very little, if any, of the furniture. We're going to talk about that when we get to the Assembly Room. But of course, the British occupied Philadelphia for 9 months in 1777, 1778, and it's safe to say, as they left the building, pretty much all the furniture was trashed, so burned and discarded. So William Penn, of course, is the founder of Pennsylvania. His image is on the top of our city hall in Center City. But he came over, he was the King of England, King Charles II, owed Penn's father a large debt. And rather than pay the debt off in pounds sterling, he said, how about some land in the New World to Penn's son, William. And Penn said, I'll take it if I can bring my Quaker friends with me. And in 1682 came over and really set up the city of Philadelphia in kind of a grid pattern, which is still in existence today as we look at our Center City area, 2 square miles between the Schuylkill and the Delaware River. Penn's government was basically a democratic institution. He set up an assembly that was democratically elected, and that would have been the body that operated next door. He set up the governor's council upstairs with his cabinet members. We're not going to go up there today. And then this would have been the judicial area, or the courtroom area. And of course, run under the auspices of King George III at that point in London. And this looks to some degree like a courtroom of today. I mean, it's got a jury boxes, whether it's a single jury or a grand jury. Judge's bench, whether it's a single judge or multiple judges. Got the witness stand as the bailiff area. And one of the few things that's a little different is the fact that the lawyers in the day, at that point in the area of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, the lawyers sat at the same table. So there wasn't a plaintiff table here and a defendant table. They sat together. But the elephant in the room basically is what I have my hand on here, and this is called a prisoner's dock. If we were looking at a criminal trial here, you literally stood trial. You went in and stood here during the course of the trial as the case was presented, to you. So, the reality is it's hard to look innocent when you're already standing in a jail cell. But that was the practice. Still in the British Commonwealth criminal trials, they still have the term prisoner's dock, and that's where the accused would stand. If we were to go back to the date of the Declaration of Independence, July 8th, when it was publicly read out here by Colonel John Nixon of the Pennsylvania militia, above the judge's bench, where you see now a portrait of the coat of arms of the state of Pennsylvania. That was put up in 1787, and it remained pretty much in place today. But if we were back in the era of 1776, we would have seen a coat of arms that looked like this. This is the coat of arms of King George III. You see the lions and the unicorns, and in Old French, it's God and my right. So the divine right of kings, church and state were one. The king's vote counted twice. So very difficult to argue with that. Although in the day and age, one of the things that the colonists were pretty much fine with was the way the judicial system worked. They were pretty much given the rights and privileges of any other English British citizen. Free and open trial. You were innocent until proven guilty. So that was something that was quite accepted. But as the Declaration of Independence was being read right outside here on July 8th, a number of men entered the courtroom here, and they tore down this quite heavy wooden coat of arms of King George III, and they publicly tied it behind a horse, drove it around town the entire afternoon, and publicly burned it in a bonfire at Front and Market Street later that evening, kind of indicating that they were all in on the Declaration of Independence and were ready to fight for their freedom and liberty. So what we're going to do is go across the hall, and I'll catch up with you there, go all the way up to, again, the bar. Okay, we are standing in the birthplace of America. Is everybody in? Just kind of scoot in and get everybody inside. Very good. So this is a national heritage site. It is a World Heritage Site, UNESCO, United Nations, and a national treasure, birthplace of the United States, and the United States Constitution. And that's kind of great to know, but I think it's probably, it mandates us giving a little bit of a short history lesson, so I'm going to do about 25 years in about, in about 4 minutes. So I'm going to paint with a roller and not a brush. I'm on the clock here. So we go back to the French and Indian War. The colonies fought with Great Britain against the French and the Indians, 1757 to 1763, pushed the French out of North America, out of Canada. British took over Quebec, Montreal, etc. And so far, so good, success story. However, that doubled the national debt in Great Britain. The Parliament and the King wanted to see some support from the colonies, so they decided they would tax the colonies. So the famous taxation without representation term, so used as a symbol of overreach. So that happened. It started with the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, which led up to the Boston Tea Party. And that was in December of 1773. Threw 400 cases of tea into the Boston Harbor, and that outraged the Parliament and King George III. And he closed the port, declared martial law, and he allowed quartering of troops in the homes of the colonists up there. And they decided that the colonies needed to put a plan of attack together, a plan of action, so that this would not repeat itself up and down the colonies. And they put together a chain of correspondence, or a channel of correspondence from New Hampshire and Massachusetts all the way down to Georgia and South Carolina, and kind of kept in touch with one another. Decided they needed to meet and to come together to put together a formal plan of action. And they decided, because it was somewhat equidistant, we call ourselves the Keystone State, so if we look at a map, we'd have about six of the colonies below us, 6 above us, right in the center. Decided they would come to Philadelphia and have that first meeting. It's called the First Continental Congress, but it wasn't in this building. It was about 2 blocks behind me here in Carpenter's Hall. First time the colonies had ever come together to discuss their future, basically. So, and of course, the purpose of the first meeting is to plan a second meeting. They clearly decided to boycott British goods, but they needed to come back and meet, and they decided they would do that in May of 1775. But what happened in April of 1775? We had the famous midnight ride of Paul Revere, the shot heard around the world, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. The war was on at that point, long before we declared independence. King George held the colonies in rebellion, and the war had started. So first thing they did when they got here first thing they did is decided where everybody's going to sit, basically, and say, history holds that the New England colonies would have sat here, so that would have probably been New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, Pennsylvania. Ben Franklin may have sat in a chair very much like this for that meeting. Franklin is pretty much known as a founding grandfather. He was probably a generation older than most of the founders. But they decided to come back here. The next thing they did is they decided they needed to put together a military, to defend ourselves. So that became the Continental Army, and they selected a 43-year-old Virginian from the Virginia table here, George Washington, to be the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Washington immediately accepted the challenge, actually showed up in his military uniform. He was pretty confident that the job would be his. It was important that, like a guy who comes to your birthday party with a guitar, he's planning to be called into action. So he basically took over and pretty much left the city. Didn't come back. He wasn't here to sign the Declaration of Independence. He was up in Boston. Got there just after the Battle of Bunker Hill and Reed's Hill, and pretty much established a ragtag group of continental, pretty much New England militiamen into a fighting force to go after. It was important that Washington got the job because he was from Virginia. Most of the warfare was taking place in New England at that point, so it showed some kind of continuity between the North and the South, with under Washington's command. So Congress continued to meet in session. We put together an olive branch petition to the king asking him it doesn't have to end this way, and the king basically never read it, discarded it, and we were continuing to, to battle it. So that takes us into early 1776, and a document that many of you have heard of called Common Sense by Thomas Paine hit the colonies like a bolt of fire. It was basically a declaration to let's go to war. Let's fight for our independence. Why should a king rule why should a monarchy rule a free people? Why should an island rule an entire continent? We need to fight for our freedom. So that hit a chord with the colonies, and they started pulling together. They came here to meet then in June of 1776, and the first order of business was Richard Henry Lee from Virginia stood up and said, I move that these colonies declare themselves free and independent states. And everybody, here, let's go. John Hancock, who was sitting in that chair, or similar to that, would say, that's great, but stop. We need to put together a committee to identify our grievances and why we're declaring independence. So we put together a committee of 5. John Adams was selected to be the chairman of that committee, eventually became our second president. And he picked 4 other people. He picked Roger Sherman from Connecticut, Robert Livingston from New York, Ben Franklin, obviously, from Pennsylvania, and a 33-year-old Virginian by the name of Thomas Jefferson from that table. And asked, basically Adams said, I'm not well liked. I'm not a particularly great writer. I'm going to delegate the writing of the document to Thomas Jefferson. So Jefferson got it, and 2.5 weeks later came back and presented the grievances, what we know as the Declaration of Independence. It was a draft. It was agreed to on July 2nd. Everybody said, this looks great, let's go ahead. And then 2 days of editing started. So there were additions, corrections, modifications, clarifications, provisions, etc. A lot of wordsmithing taking place to get the document to exactly the order they wanted, but on July 4th, the document was finished in draft form, very discombobulated, I guess you'd say, and that document was taken down to John Dunlap, who was the official printer of the Continental Congress, down here at 2nd and Market, and he printed up about 200 copies of the document. It looks like this. This is the first Declaration of Independence. Only had 2 names on it, John Hancock and Charles Thompson, who was the secretary of the Continental Congress at that point. Doesn't say unanimous, doesn't say 13. So New York had not gotten back with its vote. So the vote was 12 in favor, none opposed, 1 abstention. At that point, they went ahead. They continued to meet in session, and it wasn't until they realized this was an important milestone that they'd accomplished, and they needed to put the document on parchment and actually sign it. So it wasn't until, August 2nd that process started, and probably about 53 of the 56 names on the Declaration of Independence were actually started the signing process in August of 1776. They were reluctant to release those names and didn't until February of the following year under the document called the Goddard Broadsheet, because they were committing treason, basically. They were pledging their life, their liberty, their sacred honor, so they were somewhat protected. It wasn't until Washington crossed the Delaware, the Battle of Trenton and Princeton, so they started to develop a little confidence and said maybe we can go public with this. They continued to meet, and the war, of course, the war was on. It took 7 long years of battle, and we certainly would not have won the Revolutionary War without the support of France. So Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette came to our support, provided us with money, men, and equipment, to help make it happen. Saratoga made a big difference. The Battle of Saratoga, where they kind of decided that we could win the war. They jumped in and supported us. And the last major battle of the Revolutionary War would have been down in Yorktown in October of 1781, where Washington and Hamilton and Lafayette defeated Charles Cornwallis, along with the support of the French. And basically, it was a year and a half later, the Treaty of Paris wrapped up everything, and that was in 1783. So the war officially ended at that point. It took, as it often does, about a year and a half to clean up all of the issues and get a sign-off on it. During that period of time, the country was governed by a document called the Articles of Confederation, very loose what we call precursor to a constitution. Every state had one vote. All votes had to be unanimous. How does that work? The government had no taxing power. They relied on the states to voluntarily contribute funding to keep the government running, keep the military in place. And so very difficult, very ineffective. Every state had its own judicial system. Every state had its own governor. So it was really more of a legislative branch than anything else, the Articles of Confederation. So they came back to Philadelphia, tried to meet in here to make things work. But in May of 1783, a group of unpaid revolutionary soldiers, money was a huge issue then, surrounded the building, and they kind of forced them to adjourn from Philadelphia. They went down to initially Princeton, then Annapolis, and then Trenton, and then finally up to New York, where they continued to meet in session. And it was there that they decided in 1785 that they could not work with the Articles of Confederation. They needed to come back and revise them, fix them, basically, was the plan, tweak them a little bit. And they had an unsuccessful attempt to do that in Annapolis and decided to come to Philadelphia. And that began the Constitutional Convention of 1787 from May to September. Right here in this room, many of the same founding fathers came back again to continuing to meet in New York, but they were rotating people in and out of Philadelphia to try to do that. They realized about a week into the process that it wasn't going to work. They needed to scrap the articles, and they needed to start all over again. And so that's exactly what they did. And everybody was in kind of agreement. We had one state that liked the articles pretty much and said, we don't like to participate. Anybody guess what state that was? Rhode Island, also known as Rhode Island. But they decided not to participate. So it was really 12 states hammering this document out. And we had a lot of activity. We had the Virginia plan presented in favor of the big states. We had the New Jersey plan in favor of the smaller states. And we had the famous, mentioned it earlier, Roger Sherman Connecticut Compromise. And that was basically an agreement that allowed the Senate to have 2 seats for every state, and the House of Representatives were going to be determined by population. So that seemed to strike a chord. And at the end of the process, we had 39 names on that document, the United States Constitution. 3 of the most vigorous participants in the process elected not to vote for it, and primarily because it didn't have a Bill of Rights assigned to it. Most of the states at that point already had their constitutions. They already had bills of rights identifying the rights and privileges of the citizens. They felt that needed to be in the U.S. Constitution. James Madison, what we call the author of the United States Constitution and the father of the Bill of Rights, said, if I'm elected as a representative of Virginia, I'm going to see that gets done. And eventually it did get done when Philadelphia was the capital here in 1791. In December, we signed the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights. So, they continued to meet. The agreement was again, 39 names on that signature on the document. And at the end of the day, Ben Franklin here was asked how he thought the process went, and he said, you know what, I looked at this chair here, which is called the Sun Chair, primarily because it has on the back of its crest there, on the back of the chair, a crest that looks a lot like this, and it's a sun, But is that sun rising? Or is it setting? Tell me. He's sure of that. And Franklin said, when I got here today, I was a little pessimistic about the whole process. I thought we were going to try to tweak the articles, and I got depressed. But as I sat through the 100 days of this proceeding, I became more and more optimistic. And I can say at the end of the day, as the document is being signed, that I feel very positive about this. The best is yet to be. This may not be the best document, but there is none better at the moment. And Franklin's optimism was clearly evident. And as he left the room, one of the most famous, let's call them matriarchs of Philadelphia, Elizabeth Willing Powell, said, Dr. Franklin here, what's going on? Because everything was pretty much kept in secret. And he said, what do we got here, a monarchy or a republic? And he said, Elizabeth, we have a republic if we can keep it. And that's the challenge we have, today, some 35 years later. is to make that continue to work. On our federal seal, we have the Greek term e pluribus unum, out of many one. Even though the document was signed off 39, it was not unanimous across the states. You know, different states, different. You know, Delaware signed off, still on its license plate, the first state. We had, but it wasn't really until the Federalist Papers, you know, were released. John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison to help New York push over the line and get the document ratified. So you know, no small accomplishment. But Washington, you know, as the elected first president, was very concerned about that e pluribus unum, out of many one.